Hello and welcome to yet another episode of History Time. Today we look at a very small and interesting connection between my favorite filmmaker Guru Dutt and my favorite city Madras, that is Chennai. This episode is a tribute to Guru Dutt and also to the city on the occasion of Guru Dutt's centenary year. Follow me and let us look at what that connection is. Guru Dutt was born on July 9th, 1925. In her biography of him, Nasreen Munni Kabir, the writer, gives us a very interesting and tantalizing Madras connect. It appears that Guru Dutt's mother Vasanti spent a part of her childhood in Madras city. Of course, she married Shiv Shankar Padukone and later they travelled to Mangalore and then Bangalore, which was where Guru Dutt was born. And then much of his early life was spent in Calcutta, and the impact of that city can be seen in several films of his. Of course, his career was made in Bombay, but his Bengali connection, or at least perceived Bengali connection, would further strengthen when he dropped his surname Padukone and just referred to himself as Guru Dutt. And he married one of the most celebrated names in Hindi playback, and she too was a Bengali, Geeta Roy, who became Geeta Dutt. Guru Dutt made several wonderful films, and among these, what is considered to be his finest is Kaagaz Ke Phool, India's first film made in CinemaScope, and that was in 1959. Ironically, it was also his greatest commercial failure. Today, it is perceived differently, but then audiences trashed it. He was so hurt by that reaction that he never directed a film again thereafter. Yes, he produced films like Chaudhary Ka Chand, Saheb Bibi aur Gulam, but in all of these, the credit for direction was given to others. But still, you could make out several touches of Guru Dutt in those films. But let me come back to Kaagaz Ke Phool, made in 1959, as I said, and dealing with a director's life, the rise and fall of a film director. The film, in fact, is set in the 1940s, the heyday of the cinema studio system, when Bombay was full of great studios. And the films that Guru Dutt speaks of in Kaagaz Ke Phool were real films. Vidyapati, for instance, and then Devdas. These are mentioned in the movie. Guru Dutt plays the role of a film director, Sinha Sahab, and he, for much of the film, focuses on various studios. Interestingly, the bulk of the outdoor shots are at Vauhini Studios, better known as Vijaya-Vauhini, located at one point of time in Vadapalani in Madras city. When you follow me through some of these shots, you will make out much of that great studio, which in the 1970s was billed as Southeast Asia's greatest filmmaking facility. Vijaya-Vauhini itself was located in what was known as Vijaya Gardens, an enormous property in the Vadapalani area. It was one of the many studios that gave birth to the name Collywood, Kodambakam. Who can forget it? Ironic, isn't it, that today there are hardly any studios, but the name has still survived. Vijaya Films was begun by the grand old man of South Indian cinema, B.N. Reddy. And then his younger brother, B. Nagi Reddy, along with Chakrapani, started Vijaya Productions. In the meantime, Moola Narayanaswamy had begun the construction of Vauhini Studios. But he landed himself in some financial troubles, and therefore Vijaya Productions took over on lease Vauhini Studios in the late 1940s. And that is how you had Vijaya Productions and Vauhini Studios, one of the greatest names as far as South Indian cinema is concerned, and then later as far as Hindi films were concerned as well. You had films such as Maya Bazaar, you had films such as Appu Chesi Pappu Kudu, you had Hindi films starring Dilip Kumar, several MGR movies. They were all made at Vijaya-Vauhini. In fact, the studio had a record of hardly producing any flops. Such was its track. The film, in fact, opens with Sinha Sahab, now a broken old man, tottering in through the gates of a studio ostensibly in Bombay, but in reality, Vauhini Studios. He proceeds inside, pauses by a statue of what looks like a goddess, but he focuses more on a huge bird of prey that is swooping down in that statue, almost trying to peck him. It is representative of the world which is out to take advantage of innocent people, like that film director who at one point of time was a great man but now is a nobody. He then walks through the studio, deserted because it is the lunch break, and then he climbs the steps of a studio floor and makes his way all the way to the top, where in the studio system you had what was known as a catwalk. And that is where the technicians walked, manipulating the lights and focusing on the action that was taking place below. Here he sits in a chair, and there he begins to think about his long life. All the while in the background, you have one of the most haunting melodies of Hindi cinema, Mohammad Rafi singing Bichde Sabhi Bari Bari. Slowly everybody goes away one by one, and the film then unrolls. In the middle of the film, there is a sequence where the director, at the height of his power, is driving in an open car down the studio. And as the car progresses, you can see various employees and technicians coming out from the various sheds, taking in cameras, taking around props and sceneries, saluting him as he walks along and finally comes to the main office of the studio. This again was Vauhini's building. The last scenes of the film, perhaps the most poignant, are also shot here. The director has fallen on bad days. He needs money. He has now come as an extra to act in a film. But because he is so addicted to alcohol, he is not even able to mouth his dialogues properly. The director loses his temper and orders him to leave the studio at once. As he walks away, the heroine, played by Wahida Rehman, who was after all Guru Dutt's find, recognizes him. She tries to stop him, but he runs away, and she chases him. You can see a long shot of the two of them running, she chasing him, and finally he comes out of the entrance of Vauhini Studios, turns and runs down what must have been Vadapalani in 1958-59. Not a single human being in sight, and just a few huts and some coconut trees. With that, that sequence comes to an end. But you can see Vauhini Studios in all its grandeur in that film. That marks that connect that Guru Dutt had with Madras in that particular film. In many ways, Kaagaz Ke Phool was considered to be autobiographical, though it was 6 years ahead or 5 years ahead of Guru Dutt's suicide. It speaks about a director's decline. It speaks about a director's decline into alcohol. It speaks about his obsession with a heroine from whom his love was not going to be returned for various reasons, and finally his eventual failure. Interestingly, Guru Dutt never failed. His films continued to be successful, but he was depressive, and finally he committed suicide in 1964. The Vijaya-Vauhini Studios which were at their zenith when he made that film and which reached their peak in the 1970s, also sadly do not exist. The changing world of Indian cinema, the focus on outdoor locations, the decline of the studio system sounded its death knell, and finally in the 1980s, Vijaya-Vauhini vanished forever. What it left behind was real estate, which became hospital, wedding hall, hotel, and several other things. In some ways, the decline and fall is reflective of Guru Dutt's films as well. Even Sahib, Bibi or Gulam talks about the great decline and fall of an aristocratic feudal family of Bengal. He was a man who dwelt on decline and fall, and perhaps he would have understood about the eventual decline of the studio system. Perhaps his Kaagaz Ke Phool itself was indicative of a trend of what would eventually happen to studios. You never know about these things. But the film song itself, when it incites or when it extols a bee not to sit and hope for nectar in flowers made of paper, is very indicative of the artificiality of the film world and the fickle nature of audiences. That was Guru Dutt. He reflected on things that were not very popular, and perhaps that is why Kaagaz Ke Phool was not very liked. But today it has become a cult film, and Guru Dutt's name lives on forever. Interestingly, the credits of Kaagaz Ke Phool do not mention Vijaya-Vauhini at all. They credit processed at Central Studios, Bombay. When I read Nasreen Munni Kabir's book, I realized that many of the film sequences in Kaagaz Ke Phool were shot in Vauhini and also in modern studios in Bombay. And the most iconic scene of the film, the song Waqt Ne Kiya, with those dust beams coming in through the camera, was shot not in Madras but in Bombay. I then had my doubts. Was the film really shot in Vauhini? So I asked the family members. My dear friend Shivakumar Reddy asked his granduncle Vishwanatha Reddy, who is the son of B. Nagi Reddy, and he confirmed that yes, these scenes are indeed from Vijaya-Vauhini Studios. And then later, there was one more confirmation. When S. Balachandar made his film Bombay, the opening credits were fascinating, or was it closing credits? I forget. Where he introduces every one of the stars, the technicians, and others associated with the movie by showing them in real life and speaking about them. And then he has a shot of Vijaya-Vauhini also. And that shot is almost identical to the scene where Guru Dutt runs out of the studio at the end of Kaagaz Ke Phool. I knew that I was on firm ground. And that is why I am here with you presenting this episode. If you like this episode, like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. I promise to be back soon with further episodes from the history of Madras, that is Chennai.